Sometimes the smallest thing we leave behind is the one that leads someone back to us. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly as Claire Bennett hurried inside with 5-year-old Noah clutching her hand, both of them escaping a cold Seattle morning wrapped in steady rain. The rich aroma of fresh coffee drifted through the warm room, mixing with the scent of cinnamon pastries and damp coats. Claire smiled politely at the barista she recognized from too many rushed mornings, then guided Noah toward their usual table beside the rain-speckled window. Her navy sweater was clean but worn from countless washes, and the dark circles beneath her gentle blue eyes hinted at another night spent balancing overdue bills, freelance bookkeeping, and comforting a child who still occasionally woke from dreams asking questions she struggled to answer. Noah carefully colored dinosaurs on a paper placemat, while Claire opened the faded leather journal she carried everywhere. It wasn't expensive. The edges had softened with age, and the corners were bent from years of being slipped into handbags and backpacks. Yet it held something more valuable than money. It carried every fear she never spoke aloud, every hope she refused to abandon, and every promise she made to herself whenever life became too heavy. Between answering emails from a client who still hadn't paid her invoice and reminding Noah to finish his apple slices before reaching for the muffin, Claire quietly wrote a few new lines. Some mornings I wonder if surviving is enough for Noah. Then he laughs, and I remember why I have to keep believing tomorrow can be kinder than today. Her phone suddenly buzzed across the table. The preschool's number flashed across the screen. Claire's smile disappeared instantly. She answered, listening carefully as the teacher apologized. A water pipe had burst in one classroom. Parents were asked to pick up their children earlier than expected because the building would be closing for emergency repairs. Claire glanced toward Noah, forcing another reassuring smile before standing quickly. Looks like we get an early adventure today, buddy. Noah's face brightened immediately. Can we stop by? The library. If we finish our errands first, she answered, brushing rainwater from his blonde hair before zipping up his little jacket. In her hurry, Claire tucked her laptop into her canvas bag, grabbed Noah's backpack, paid for breakfast through the Café app she had nearly forgotten to reload, and hurried into the rainy street without noticing the journal still resting quietly beneath the empty coffee cup. 20 minutes later, another customer stepped into the cafe, shaking droplets from a charcoal overcoat that looked tailored but understated. Ethan Brooks acknowledged the familiar greetings with an absent nod before settling into the now empty table beside the same window. At 39, the billionaire CEO had grown accustomed to boardrooms, interviews, and private lounges, yet this neighborhood cafe remained one of the few places where strangers rarely interrupted him. He preferred it that way. His assistant often joked that he disappeared here whenever the weight of running Brooks Global became louder than his own thoughts. Ethan opened his laptop, prepared to review acquisition reports before his first meeting, but something beside the napkin holder caught his attention. A weathered leather journal. He looked around the cafe. Nobody seemed to be searching for it. Assuming it belonged to someone who might return, he picked it up, intending only to check the inside cover for a name or phone number. Instead, the journal slipped open naturally to the page Claire had written only minutes earlier. His eyes landed on a single sentence before he could stop himself. Every day, I try to convince my son that heroes are real, even though the one I once believed in never came back. Ethan froze. The sounds of steaming milk, quiet conversations, and clinking mugs faded into the background. Something about those words settled heavily against a place in his heart he had buried years ago. He slowly turned one more page, telling himself he was only looking for a name. But the handwriting, the honesty, and the quiet strength behind every sentence refused to let him close the book. For reasons he could not explain, it felt less like reading a stranger's diary and more like hearing a voice he had been searching for without ever realizing it. Ethan lowered the journal onto the table, yet his hand remained resting lightly on its worn leather cover, as though closing it completely would somehow silence a voice that had only just begun speaking. He had spent years reading financial forecasts, legal contracts, and market analyses where every sentence was carefully designed to persuade or protect. This was different. There were no polished words, no hidden agenda, no audience to impress. Whoever had written these pages had expected no one else to ever read them. The honesty unsettled him. He glanced toward the counter again, hoping someone would rush back inside, asking whether anyone had found a missing notebook. No one came. Rain continued sliding down the cafe windows, turning the busy street outside into blurred ribbons of gray and silver. After several quiet moments, Ethan gently reopened the journal, promising himself he would stop the moment he discovered the owner's name. Instead, another page welcomed him with neat handwriting that somehow remained graceful despite occasional smudges where tiny drops of water had blurred the ink. Maybe tears, he wondered, before immediately feeling guilty for making assumptions about someone he had never met. The next entry began simply. Noah asked me today if rich people ever feel lonely. I almost answered no because that would have been easier. But I remembered loneliness does not care how much money someone has. It only asks whether someone is waiting for you when you come home. Ethan slowly leaned back in his chair. The sentence lingered inside him longer than he expected. Every evening, he returned to a penthouse overlooking the city skyline, where everything was perfectly arranged exactly as he had left it. Fresh flowers appeared without him ordering them. Groceries restocked themselves because someone else handled the shopping. Lights adjusted automatically as he walked from room to room. Yet silence always greeted him first. He had convinced himself for years that success demanded sacrifice. Reading those words forced him to wonder whether he had mistaken isolation for achievement. He turned another page. There were small memories scattered between ordinary days. Noah losing his first tooth. A pancake shaped like a dinosaur that fell apart before reaching the plate. A surprise rainbow after an afternoon storm. Each story ended with quiet gratitude instead of complaint. Claire never pretended life was easy, but she refused to let hardship become the only thing her son remembered about childhood. Ethan found himself smiling when he read about Noah insisting every squirrel in the neighborhood secretly attended school after sunset. Then the smile faded as another entry appeared. I still keep that silver compass even though it stopped working years ago. Sometimes broken things remind us where we used to believe we were going. Ethan's fingers tightened around the edge of the page. A silver compass. His heartbeat slowed into the strange, heavy rhythm that always accompanied forgotten memories. Nearly 8 years earlier, he had given someone a small silver compass during a rainy weekend at a waterfront street market. It had not been expensive. They had laughed because neither of them knew how to read one properly. He had engraved 3 tiny words inside before wrapping it in brown paper. Find your way. He had not thought about that afternoon in years, yet now every detail returned with astonishing clarity. The smell of roasted coffee, wind coming off the harbor, a young woman laughing as rain soaked both of them because neither wanted to give up the conversation to find shelter. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. It could not be the same compass. Thousands of identical souvenirs had probably been sold across the country. Coincidences happened every day. He reminded himself of that several times, but his thoughts refused to settle. Carefully, he continued reading until another sentence quietly stole his attention. I never blamed him for disappearing because sometimes life takes people away before they have the chance to explain why they never came back. Ethan stared at those words for a long time. He did not know Claire Bennett. He had not even found her name yet. But for reasons beyond logic, every page felt strangely familiar, as though pieces of a forgotten chapter in his own life had somehow survived inside the journal of a woman whose face he had never seen. At that exact moment, his phone vibrated with a reminder about the board meeting scheduled to begin in 15 minutes. For the first time in years, Ethan looked at the notification, silenced it without reading the agenda, and quietly whispered to the empty chair across the table, "Who are you?" The boardroom on the 42nd floor overlooked the entire Seattle skyline, but Ethan Brooks barely noticed the view that had impressed investors for years. Charts glowed across the enormous screen while senior executives discussed quarterly projections, expansion strategies, and market opportunities worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Normally, he would have challenged every assumption and questioned every number before anyone else had the chance. Today, however, his thoughts remained somewhere inside a small neighborhood cafe where a weathered leather journal rested beside his untouched cup of coffee. More than once, someone addressed him directly before realizing he had not heard a single word. His chief financial officer finally paused the presentation. "Ethan, are you all right?" He blinked, offered a brief apology, and suggested postponing the remaining agenda until the following morning. The room fell unusually silent. During the past 12 years, Ethan had never delayed a meeting without a compelling business reason. As the executives quietly gathered their laptops, several exchanged puzzled glances, wondering what could possibly have distracted the man known for his relentless focus. 20 minutes later, Ethan returned to his private office carrying the journal inside a simple paper bag, almost embarrassed by how carefully he handled it. He placed it gently on the walnut desk before looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Rain still washed over the city below, softening every building into muted shades of gray. For reasons he could not explain, he no longer felt like the owner of one of the largest companies on the West Coast. He felt like an ordinary man trying to solve a mystery that had unexpectedly found him. He opened the journal once more, this time determined to identify its owner without reading another personal entry. Several pages near the front contained grocery lists, reminders, and carefully organized monthly budgets where every dollar had been assigned a purpose. Rent, preschool, utilities, health insurance, emergency savings. There was almost nothing left after each calculation, yet every page ended with one handwritten sentence underlined in blue ink. We still have enough. Ethan quietly exhaled. That simple line somehow carried more dignity than many speeches he had heard from people with unlimited resources. Turning another page, he finally found a date from nearly 8 years earlier. The handwriting looked slightly younger, less steady, but unmistakably the same. Today I met someone who made me believe timing might actually exist. He said success should never cost us the people we love. I laughed because neither of us had enough money to worry about success. Ethan felt the corners of his memory begin to sharpen. He remembered saying those exact words while sitting on a wooden bench overlooking Elliott Bay after sharing fish tacos from a food truck, because it was all they could afford. Back then, Brooks Global had existed only as an ambitious business plan stored inside an old laptop. He had been 29, hopeful, exhausted, and completely unknown. He continued reading with growing disbelief. We walked through Pike Place Market until the shops closed. Before we said goodbye, he handed me a tiny silver compass with 3 words engraved inside. Find your way. I promised I would never lose it. Ethan slowly stood from his chair. His pulse echoed loudly in the quiet office. Those 3 words had never appeared in any advertisement or souvenir. He had paid an elderly craftsman extra money to engrave them because he wanted the gift to be unique. No one else could have known them. His eyes hurried across the page, searching for more. At the bottom, one final sentence waited as though it had been written specifically for this moment. His name was Ethan. I hope life is kind to him because he deserves every dream he is brave enough to chase. Ethan closed the journal and pressed both hands against the desk, overwhelmed not by shock, but by recognition. Claire. Her name appeared neatly beneath the entry for the first time. Claire Bennett. The woman he had searched for after returning from a month-long overseas business trip, only to discover her apartment building had been sold, her phone disconnected, and every trail had vanished. He had convinced himself she had chosen a different future, perhaps with someone else, and eventually buried the memory beneath endless work. Yet she had not forgotten him. Every page quietly proved that. Then another realization settled over him with breathtaking force. The newest entries had all been written in the present tense. Claire was still here, somewhere in the same city, still carrying the silver compass, still believing he had simply disappeared. Ethan looked toward the rain-covered skyline once more, his reflection staring back from the glass with an expression he had not worn in years. Hope. Claire did not realize anything unusual had happened until late that evening. After putting Noah to bed inside their modest one-bedroom apartment, she reached into her canvas bag to continue writing before sleep, only to freeze when her fingers touched nothing but her laptop charger and a packet of crayons. She searched the kitchen table, the bookshelf, beneath the couch cushions, and even inside Noah's little backpack. The journal was gone. Her heart sank with a quiet disappointment that surprised even her. It was only paper and leather to anyone else, but to Claire it held nearly 8 years of memories she had never trusted to another soul. Every victory, every fear, every promise she had made to herself after Noah was born lived inside those pages. She sat on the edge of the sofa, closed her eyes, and retraced the entire day. Breakfast, the preschool call, the rain, the cafe. She whispered to herself, I left it there. The cafe had already closed for the evening. There was nothing she could do until morning. Meanwhile, 40 floors above downtown Seattle, Ethan remained alone inside his office long after every light in the neighboring buildings had begun switching off. The journal rested neatly on his desk, untouched for nearly an hour. He had promised himself he would not read another page. Claire deserved that much respect. What mattered now was returning it. Yet another question lingered in his mind. If he simply called the number listed inside the Café loyalty receipt tucked between 2 pages, would she recognize his name? Would she remember him immediately? Or would 8 years have turned him into nothing more than a distant memory attached to an old silver compass? He picked up his phone and called his executive assistant, Sophia Grant. She answered almost instantly despite the late hour. "Is everything all right, Ethan? I need a favor," he said quietly. "Not a corporate investigation. Not a background report. I only need help finding someone so I can return something she accidentally left behind." Sophia smiled through the phone. "That is the least mysterious request you have ever made." Ethan hesitated before continuing. "Her name is Claire Bennett. I do not want her contacted. I do not want anyone from the company approaching her. I only need to know where I can quietly return her journal without embarrassing her." Sophia noticed the unusual softness in his voice. During the 6 years she had worked beside him, Ethan had never asked for personal help involving a woman. "I understand," she answered. "I will keep it completely private." The search took less than an hour. Claire worked remotely as a freelance bookkeeper for several small businesses, while also accepting occasional evening shifts at a neighborhood community center, helping with administrative work. Her apartment address appeared in public records, but Sophia intentionally left it off the report, sensing Ethan's request was guided by respect rather than curiosity. Instead, she included one final note. Every weekday morning between 8 and 9, Claire and her son usually stopped at the same neighborhood cafe before preschool. Ethan read the single page, then quietly folded it in half. He could have sent a driver. Years ago, he had lost someone because circumstances stole their chance to explain. He refused to let another misunderstanding begin with distance. The following morning, he arrived at the cafe before sunrise, wearing dark jeans, a navy sweater, and a simple rain jacket instead of the tailored suits that usually announced his position before he ever introduced himself. He chose the same table beside the window and ordered black coffee, placing Claire's journal carefully inside a plain canvas tote at his feet. Outside, gentle rain once again painted shimmering reflections across the sidewalks. Inside, soft jazz drifted through the speakers while baristas prepared the morning rush. Ethan checked the door each time the bell chimed, his heartbeat quietly quickening with every customer who entered. An elderly couple, 2 college students, a construction worker grabbing breakfast to go. None of them were Claire. Then, nearly 20 minutes later, the bell rang once more. A familiar little blonde boy hurried through the doorway holding his mother's hand, excitedly pointing toward the pastry display. Claire followed behind him, her face carrying the unmistakable look of someone hoping against hope that something precious might still be waiting exactly where she had left it. Claire's eyes immediately searched the corner table beside the rain-covered window. It was empty except for a fresh cup of coffee and a man sitting quietly with his attention fixed on the street outside. Her shoulders fell ever so slightly. She had hoped the journal might still be resting exactly where she had forgotten it, as though time itself had decided to be merciful for once. Noah noticed her expression and gently squeezed her hand. "It is okay, Mom," he whispered with surprising maturity. "Maybe someone nice found it." Claire forced a smile. Maybe they did. She approached the counter and asked the young barista if anyone had turned in a brown leather journal the previous morning. The woman looked apologetic as she checked beneath the register and inside the lost and found drawer. "I am sorry. We have not received anything like that." Claire thanked her anyway, trying not to sound disappointed. As she turned to leave, Ethan quietly stood from his chair. He had imagined this moment dozens of different ways throughout the night, yet every rehearsed sentence suddenly disappeared. Claire looked older than the young woman he remembered, not because of age, but because life had gently placed responsibility upon her shoulders. Even so, her eyes were exactly the same. Calm, kind, honest. He took one careful step forward. "Excuse me," he said softly. Claire turned toward the unfamiliar voice. Their eyes met for the first time in nearly 8 years, but recognition did not immediately appear on her face. Time had changed them both. Ethan's hair carried a few strands of silver now, and success had shaped his posture into quiet confidence. Claire simply saw a polite stranger holding a canvas tote. "I believe this belongs to you," he said, reaching inside the bag before carefully lifting out the familiar leather journal. Claire gasped so softly that only Noah heard it. Her hands instinctively moved toward the journal before stopping halfway, almost afraid it might disappear again if she touched it too quickly. "You found it?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "It was on the table after you left yesterday morning." Relief washed across her face. She accepted the journal with both hands, gently running her fingertips across the worn cover as though greeting an old friend. She quickly opened it, flipping through several pages until she reached the familiar blue ribbon bookmark. Nothing appeared missing. Nothing looked disturbed. She closed it again, holding it close against her chest. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "You have no idea what this means to me." Ethan felt an unexpected weight settle inside his heart. He knew exactly what it meant to her. He simply could not tell her why. "I am glad it found its way back," he answered carefully. Noah stepped closer, studying Ethan with open curiosity. Children often noticed kindness long before adults did. "Mom cried a little when she thought it was gone," he announced with complete honesty. Claire laughed nervously. "Noah," the little boy shrugged. "You did." Ethan smiled warmly. "Then I am very happy it could come home." Noah smiled back immediately. "I am Noah. It is nice to meet you, Noah." Ethan extended his hand, and the little boy proudly shook it. "I am Ethan." The name lingered in the air for only a heartbeat before disappearing beneath the ordinary sounds of the cafe. Claire politely nodded without reacting. The name was familiar only because thousands of people shared it. She had no reason to connect it with a memory buried almost a decade earlier. Ethan noticed the absence of recognition, but felt no disappointment. He had expected as much. Before either of them could continue, Claire's phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen and sighed quietly. "I am sorry. I have to take this. Thank you again." "Truly." Ethan stepped aside to give her privacy while she answered a client asking about overdue financial reports. As Claire spoke, Noah wandered toward the pastry display, pressing both hands against the glass while deciding between a blueberry muffin and a cinnamon roll. Ethan watched the little boy with a gentle smile. There was something quietly familiar in Noah's thoughtful expression whenever he listened before speaking. Claire finished the call a minute later, thanked Ethan once more, bought Noah his favorite blueberry muffin, and headed toward the door. Just before leaving, she looked back. "People usually do not go out of their way for strangers anymore," she said. "You did. I hope someone shows you the same kindness one day." Ethan watched the door close behind her as the bell chimed softly once again. He remained standing long after she disappeared into the rainy sidewalk, repeating her words silently to himself. She still believed they were strangers. Yet somehow, after only a few quiet minutes together, he already knew with complete certainty that this would not be the last time their paths crossed. The rest of the week should have returned to normal, but neither Claire nor Ethan found it as easy as they expected. Claire continued balancing client deadlines during the day and community center paperwork in the evenings, while Noah happily counted the days until his kindergarten class visited the Seattle Aquarium. Life moved forward exactly as it always had, yet every now and then she found herself remembering the quiet stranger who had returned her journal without asking for praise or expecting anything in return. There had been something unusually familiar about the calm confidence in his voice, but she dismissed the thought each time it surfaced. Kind people still existed. Perhaps that was all there was to it. Across the city, Ethan discovered that concentrating on business had become unexpectedly difficult. Every meeting reminded him of sentences Claire had written about courage, patience, and never allowing hardship to steal kindness. Late one afternoon, he stood outside the conference room after another successful negotiation worth more than most people earned in several lifetimes. Yet the victory felt strangely hollow. His attention drifted toward the framed family photographs displayed on a junior employee's desk nearby. Parents, children, weekend vacations, imperfect smiles. For years he had believed achievement could eventually make up for everything else life had taken away. Claire's journal had quietly challenged that belief without ever trying to. Instead of searching for excuses to see her again, Ethan made a different decision. If fate had placed them back in the same city after 8 years, then forcing another meeting would only repeat the mistakes of people who tried controlling outcomes instead of earning trust. He instructed himself to let life move naturally. Yet kindness, he decided, never required permission. That same evening, while reviewing proposals from the Brooks Global Community Foundation, one application immediately caught his attention. A neighborhood learning center serving single parents had requested funding to expand its after-school tutoring program and replace aging computers that frequently crashed during homework sessions. Ethan looked twice at the address. It was the very community center where Sophia's report had mentioned Claire occasionally worked. Without saying her name or revealing any personal connection, he approved the grant immediately. His only request was simple: deliver the donation anonymously. No press release. No photographs. No company logos. Let the children believe. Good things sometimes happen quietly. 3 weeks later, excitement spread through the community center as volunteers unpacked brand new computers, bookshelves, and educational supplies. The director gathered everyone together with grateful tears in her eyes. An anonymous donor made all of this possible, she announced. They asked for nothing in return except that we continue helping families who need a place to belong. Claire looked around the transformed classroom with genuine amazement. The outdated computers she constantly apologized for had disappeared. New reading corners welcomed children with colorful beanbags and shelves filled with books. Noah ran straight toward a science display, his eyes shining with wonder. "Mom, look! They even have space books now." Claire smiled warmly. Someone has a very generous heart. She silently hoped the unknown donor understood how many lives had just become a little easier. Days later, Ethan happened to drive past the center after visiting a nearby construction project. Traffic slowed near the intersection, giving him an unexpected view through the large front windows. Inside, Claire knelt beside Noah as they helped younger children organize books on freshly painted shelves. She laughed when one little girl proudly placed every dinosaur book in the princess section because they were all her favorites. Ethan remained inside his car as the traffic light stayed red. He watched Claire encourage every child with the same quiet patience he had seen reflected in her journal. She never looked toward the street. She never knew he had been there. When the light finally changed, Ethan continued driving without stopping. He smiled to himself, not because he wanted recognition, but because for the first time in many years he understood something success had never managed to teach him. The greatest changes in someone's life often arrived without applause, without headlines, and without anyone knowing who had opened the door. As evening settled over Seattle, Claire tucked Noah into bed and opened her journal once more. She wrote only one sentence before closing it with a peaceful smile. Maybe the world has been kinder to us lately. Because somewhere, someone remembered that compassion can still change an ordinary day. Miles away, Ethan stood beside his apartment window watching the city lights appear one by one, completely unaware that although Claire still did not remember his face, their hearts had quietly begun finding each other again through the smallest acts of unseen kindness. Autumn arrived quietly, painting Seattle with golden leaves that gathered along sidewalks after every crisp morning breeze. Life settled into a gentle rhythm neither Claire nor Ethan had planned, yet somehow both found themselves crossing the same corners of the city more often than chance alone could explain. It began with small moments. Ethan happened to be reading at the cafe when Claire and Noah stopped in after preschool. Another afternoon, he noticed them feeding ducks beside Green Lake while he walked between meetings to clear his thoughts. Days later, they unexpectedly reached the same bookstore at nearly the same time, both searching for children's stories. None of the encounters lasted long, but each left behind another thread connecting two lives that had once been separated by silence. Noah, however, needed no time at all. He greeted Ethan with the fearless enthusiasm only children possess. "Mr. Ethan," he called one Saturday morning as he spotted him browsing picture books. "Look what I found." He proudly held up a book about astronauts exploring Mars. Ethan crouched beside him with genuine interest. "That looks like an excellent choice." Noah grinned. "Mom says if I keep reading, maybe one day I can build spaceships." Ethan smiled. "Your mother sounds very wise." Claire approached with an embarrassed laugh. "I hope he is not interrupting your shopping." "Not at all," Ethan answered. "He has very good taste in books." They ended up sharing coffee from the bookstore Café, while Noah colored rockets on the children's activity table nearby. Conversation came surprisingly easily. Claire spoke about balancing remote bookkeeping with raising Noah. Ethan mentioned only that he managed a company with several offices across the country, carefully avoiding headlines, business magazines, or anything revealing the scale of his responsibilities. Claire appreciated how naturally he listened. Most people waited for their turn to speak. Ethan seemed genuinely interested in every answer she gave. As they prepared to leave, Noah tugged gently on Ethan's sleeve. "Can you come to my school science fair next Friday?" Claire immediately looked mortified. "Noah, you cannot invite people like that." The little boy frowned. "Why not? Friends come to science fairs." Ethan looked toward Claire before answering. "Only if your mother says it is all right." Claire smiled politely. "I appreciate the invitation, but I am sure you have a very busy schedule." Ethan nodded without arguing. "Perhaps another time." That evening, back inside his apartment, Ethan opened the leather notebook he had begun carrying after returning Claire's journal. It was the first personal journal he had ever owned. Across the blank page, he wrote a single sentence. "Today I realized I know almost everything about running a corporation, yet I still have so much to learn about simply showing up for people." He closed the notebook and glanced toward the small wooden box resting on a nearby shelf. Inside lay a faded ticket stub from Pike Place Market, an old photograph of two young dreamers standing beneath umbrellas, and the matching silver compass he had bought for himself on that rainy afternoon 8 years earlier. He had never thrown any of it away. The following Friday, an unexpected cancellation postponed Ethan's final afternoon meeting. Without allowing himself too much time to reconsider, he drove toward Noah's elementary school carrying a small bag filled with science stickers and a children's astronomy encyclopedia he had purchased earlier that morning. The gymnasium buzzed with excited families moving from table to table, while homemade volcanoes, solar system displays, and colorful posters filled every corner. Ethan quietly entered near the back, hoping simply to congratulate Noah before leaving unnoticed. Claire was helping adjust a display board when she suddenly looked up. Surprise crossed her face. "You actually came." Ethan smiled gently. A future spaceship builder should always have an audience. Noah raced across the room and threw his arms around Ethan with pure excitement. "I knew you would not forget." The simple sentence settled deeply inside Ethan's heart. "I knew you would not forget." Claire watched the moment in thoughtful silence. Something inside her stirred unexpectedly. The warmth in Ethan's eyes, the calm certainty in his smile, the way he always seemed to arrive exactly when kindness was needed. For the briefest moment, an old memory flickered through her mind like sunlight breaking through clouds. A rainy afternoon, a young man laughing beside the waterfront, a silver compass resting in her hand. She looked at Ethan again, her heartbeat slowing as an impossible question quietly formed inside her heart. Where have I seen those eyes before? That evening, after the science fair had ended and Noah had fallen asleep with his new astronomy book resting on his chest, Claire sat alone beside the apartment window with her journal open across her lap. Rain tapped softly against the glass, sounding almost identical to the afternoon 8 years earlier when she had first met the young entrepreneur who had carried impossible dreams inside an old backpack and believed that hard work could eventually outshine luck. She slowly turned through older pages until she reached the faded entry about the silver compass. Without thinking, she stood, opened the small wooden box she kept inside the bedroom closet, and gently lifted the compass into her hand. The silver had dulled with time, but the tiny engraving remained perfectly clear. "Find your way." Her heart began beating faster. She remembered every detail now. Ethan had smiled as he handed it to her, joking that neither of them could read a compass properly, so perhaps they would simply have to trust each other instead. The memory felt so vivid that it almost erased the years between then and now. Yet the quiet man she had recently met could not possibly be the same Ethan. The young dreamer she had known had spoken about struggling to secure investors and working 2 jobs to keep his small company alive. The man she had coffee with now carried himself with effortless confidence, drove a modest but elegant car, and casually mentioned managing offices across the country. Life could change people, she reminded herself, but not that much. Across the city, Ethan sat inside his apartment holding the matching compass in one hand while reading the latest entry he had copied from memory after returning Claire's journal. He had not intended to remember her words so precisely, yet they continued echoing inside him. Every act of kindness leaves a map behind. Someone else may follow it long after you are gone. He smiled quietly. Claire had never realized she had been leaving maps for him ever since the day they met again. She had reminded him how to slow down, how to notice people instead of opportunities, and how success meant very little if it could not make someone else's day easier. His phone buzzed with a message from Sophia, reminding him about a charity gala the following evening. Brooks Global would be announcing a new scholarship initiative for single parents returning to school. Ethan stared at the invitation before another idea slowly formed. "Sophia," he said when she answered. "The community center we supported recently works with many families who would benefit from the program, correct?" "Yes," she replied. Several local organizations were invited. Ethan looked toward the compass again. "Please make sure the center receives enough guest passes for every family that wants to attend." "Of course," Sophia answered without asking why. The following evening, Claire almost declined the invitation. Formal events were far outside her comfort zone, and she owned only one simple navy dress that she had worn twice in the past 3 years. But the community center director insisted. "You helped keep this place running when we barely had enough volunteers. Tonight you deserve to celebrate with us." Noah enthusiastically agreed after learning there would be dessert. "Fancy cake always tastes better," he declared with complete confidence. Claire laughed and finally accepted. The downtown hotel ballroom sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers, while soft piano music floated through conversations filled with business leaders, teachers, volunteers, and families from across the city. Claire felt slightly out of place, but grateful to witness so many people supporting the same cause. Noah stood beside her in his neatly pressed blue shirt, fascinated by every light hanging from the ceiling. Then the room gradually became quieter. Conversations paused as guests turned toward the entrance. Claire followed their gaze. A familiar figure stepped inside wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, greeting board members, city officials, and nonprofit directors with calm professionalism. People welcomed him with unmistakable admiration. Someone nearby whispered, "That is Ethan Brooks, the founder and chief executive officer of Brooks Global." Claire felt the air leave her lungs. She looked from the stage banners displaying the Brooks Global Foundation logo to the man who had returned her journal, shared coffee with Noah, attended the science fair, and listened to her ordinary stories as though they mattered. At that same moment, Ethan looked across the ballroom and found her standing perfectly still. Their eyes met once again, but this time there were no strangers between them. Only years of unanswered questions waiting quietly for the truth to finally find its way home. For a long moment, neither Claire nor Ethan moved. The ballroom continued buzzing around them, yet every conversation seemed to fade into the distance. Claire searched his face again, this time without the assumptions that had hidden the truth. The smile, the patient eyes, the quiet way he listened before speaking. Suddenly, the years disappeared. She saw the young man who had once shared fish tacos with her at Pike Place Market, who had laughed in the rain, who had placed a silver compass in her hand, and told her to keep believing even when life became confusing. She took one slow step toward him. "It was you," she whispered, almost afraid the words would disappear if spoken too loudly. Ethan nodded gently. "Yes." Claire's eyes filled with emotion, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming feeling of finally understanding a mystery she had carried for nearly 8 years. "I thought you forgot me." Ethan slowly shook his head. "I never forgot you, Claire. I searched for you when I came back. Your apartment was empty. Your phone no longer worked. Every place I knew was gone. I believed you had chosen another life, and I told myself the kindest thing I could do was let you be happy." Claire lowered her eyes for a moment before reaching into her handbag. She carefully placed the small silver compass into his hand. "I never stopped carrying this." Ethan looked down at the familiar engraving. "Find your way." His smile softened as he held up the matching compass he had quietly carried in his own jacket pocket throughout the evening. Claire stared at it in disbelief before laughing through happy tears. "You kept yours too." "Every single day," he answered. Noah looked from one adult to the other with wide, curious eyes. "Mom, were you friends before?" Claire knelt beside her son and brushed a strand of blonde hair away from his forehead. "A long time ago." Noah smiled at Ethan without hesitation. "I knew you looked at Mom like you already knew her." The innocent observation made all 3 of them laugh. A few minutes later, Ethan was invited onto the stage to welcome everyone to the scholarship celebration. Standing before hundreds of guests, He spoke about opportunity, education, and community, but before concluding, he paused for a quiet moment. Many people believe success is measured by what we build, he said. I have learned that success is really measured by the people we refuse to forget. Sometimes life gives us a second chance to become the person we should have been the first time. When that happens, we should be brave enough to accept the gift. Claire listened silently, knowing those words were not part of the prepared speech. They belonged to both of them. Over the following months, their friendship grew naturally. Ethan never tried to impress Claire with wealth or influence. Instead, he helped Noah build model rockets on Saturday mornings, attended school events whenever he was invited, and learned that the happiest evenings often involved homemade pasta around Claire's small kitchen table instead of formal dinners overlooking the city. Claire slowly discovered that the thoughtful young dreamer she had once admired had never truly disappeared. Beneath the responsibilities of becoming a billionaire, he had simply been waiting for someone to remind him why he had started dreaming in the first place. One spring afternoon, nearly a year after the forgotten journal had brought them together again, Noah ran across a park carrying a kite, while Ethan and Claire watched from a picnic blanket beneath blooming cherry trees. "Can I call you Dad someday?" Noah asked shyly after returning to catch his breath. Ethan looked first at Claire. She smiled with quiet certainty before giving a gentle nod. Ethan knelt beside the little boy and smiled through grateful eyes. "Whenever you are ready." Noah threw his arms around him without another word. Later that evening, Claire opened her journal to a fresh page. She smiled as she wrote the final entry. "I used to believe diaries existed to protect memories from being forgotten. I understand now they can do something even more beautiful. Sometimes they quietly guide lost hearts back to the people who were searching for them all along." She closed the journal, placed it beside the two silver compasses resting together on the bookshelf, and realized that the greatest chapters of her life had not been written by perfect plans or extraordinary luck. They had begun the ordinary morning she accidentally left one small journal behind, allowing someone to finally read not just her words, but her heart.